They gave her a skirt to put on and it had pockets. They loaded that skirt up with New Testament Bibles and smuggled like 120 New Testaments across the border into China, like into a closed country. And she was 14. Teen Mania was so happy to put children in dangerous situations over and over and over again. We thought we were doing it to serve the Lord. I was placed as an administrative assistant to the director of Honor Academy recruiting.
How was that?
The worst experience of my professional life. It was such a harmful weekend. A friend of mine was placed in a coffin, like a wooden coffin. They nailed it shut and they buried her in the coffin, as if like 2 seconds in a coffin, much less being buried alive in the coffin, isn't going to traumatize you for life. These are actual acts of torture. I mean, it was a lot of verbal assault, sleep deprivation. It was pushing your body well past its limits. You would be reciting scriptures and you had to memorize these scriptures in advance. It was meant to prepare us to die. And they asked me to stay. They offered to pay for me to stay, to cover my tuition for a second year. And I said, absolutely no way, because at that point I was convinced that I was in a cult.
Wow,
And
you knew.
Yeah, we were taught to disconnect from our physical experiences, our own mental cognitions. We were dying to ourselves, and this was part of the death.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast apps and you would like to see our faces and join in on the conversation, go to YouTube instead, where you can like, subscribe, you can leave those words of encouragement for our guests who are sharing their stories. They're real people. I always have to say that because we get so used to watching TV and all the crazy things going on there, but people forget these are real people's lives. So we love it so much when you leave those comments for them and support them. It makes them feel seen and validated, and it boosts the algorithm. So today's guest, she was on the documentary Amazon's Shiny Happy People 2. This is not about the Duggars, although Shiny Happy People 1 was. This one is about Teen Mania, the Honor Academy, basically teens paying lots of money to go and do labor for free and going on mission trips that were potentially dangerous, and some of them were dangerous. So we are talking about her experiences in this Teen Mania company, huge organization, and all the shenanigans going on. So thank you so much for joining us, Carrie Saum.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
I refer to Teen Mania as a militant evangelical youth organization on a gated, guarded compound in rural East Texas.
Yes, that really paints a better picture than what I was trying to pull together. So yeah, you were in the documentary and you had a lot of very emotional parts, and I'm like choking back tears as I'm taking notes, and I really appreciated your perspective on the show. And we didn't see a lot of your story, which is why we love to do these interviews after the documentaries air with these guests, because for editing purposes, they can't keep everything in. And you had said that they actually let you know why they cut out some of your story. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I knew in advance of the series airing that some of my story would not make it. And the reason for that is because it became about a different piece. It became about money. And that wasn't the goal of the docuseries. The goal wasn't to talk about the gross financial mismanagement of Teen Mania, which of course there was a gross financial mismanagement, but it was landing more into the financial piece. And really the story was about survivorship and how we were groomed to become martyrs and groomed to give everything to Jesus, including our lives. And so it wasn't quite in the pocket, but it was pretty close. It was pocket adjacent.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to hearing more of that story. Just before we get in, though, how has it been since the release? How have the
Yeah.
emotions been coming out? Have people been contacting you? What's that like?
Yeah. I've had so much love poured out, truly. I've had a few haters, and of course, there are going to be haters, but I don't live life in the public eye. I am a normal, regular person. So I think some of the other folks who do live more in the public eye, like Danny, or Corey, or Phil and Liz, probably get a lot more pushback, I guess, a lot more haters, but I haven't really had many. Most of it has just been so kind and so encouraging. Lots of people have reached out and just said, "We really appreciate you. We love that you decided to do this. And it's healing something in me that I didn't know needed to be healed." I've had so many people from other organizations, not just from Teen Mania, reach out and tell me that they were part of YWAM or Young Life or some other parachurch organization. Um, and even though this wasn't their story, it wasn't their organization, they still really resonated with it. They still saw themselves reflected. And that was my hope. My hope was that people would receive that deeper healing that they were not afforded while they were at the internship or while they were part of their parachurch organization.
And why did you do the documentary? Did they get in contact with you because of something that you posted, or how did that work?
Just very randomly, I will post TikTok videos. And I posted one about the first season of Shiny Happy People. And it focused on Michelle Duggar and how she was an abused wife. And you could tell it in the way she was looking at her husband. Everyone in Josh Duggar's life who is supporting him, they are complicit to his crimes, and they are also victims of the same messed up religious structure that he was part of that allowed him to get away with it for so long. So that garnered a little bit of attention, and they found it on TikTok and asked me to be part of the series.
Nice. I love what social media can do these days. I feel like you're one of 3 that we've talked to who are like, "Yeah, they found me on TikTok." And I just love that we can cast people. I mean, it's such a way to connect, right? Even with YouTube, just connect with people all over the world and share your stories. And I love how it seems like the people are the ones responsible for the media now. The people are speaking up, the people are being heard, and the people are being found and brought in and coming together. And it's all so cool. So let's dive into your story. Let's talk about your childhood, a little bit how you were raised, maybe the church you belong to, so we can have an idea of the context of your life before Teen Mania.
Sure. I was born into a Christian household. My parents were very Christian. They were first generation Christians, and they got their families saved. Everyone else got saved because of my parents' conversions when they were children. And my dad became a pastor. He went through seminary and is a very theologically focused person. And yeah, I mean, I was in church anytime the doors were open. When I got a little bit older and it was time for a youth group, our church was very small. We lived in Midland, Texas, and my dad's church was a tiny little Bible church, very staunch, very stoic. We sang hymns, we only had the piano, so it was very, even by religious standards, it was still very conservative. I was really feeling like I wanted to be part of a youth group, and there simply wasn't enough kids in our church to be able to support that. So I started looking for other youth groups that I would feel comfortable with. I looked at friends' youth groups, and one of the youth groups I attended went to Acquire the Fire every year. And they hyped it up and they were like, "You got to come." And I was like, "Yeah, let's go. They're going to have fireworks. It's going to be awesome. They're going to be cute boys everywhere." And I was right. the hype was real. And that was the first moment where I remember feeling an emotional connection to Jesus, or to this entity that I had been taught to love my whole life, but had never really felt love. I had felt a lot of judgment and a lot of fear, but never a solid emotional or spiritual connection. And that Acquire the Fire was kind of my first experience of that.
And vastly different from your church where they have rock bands and the fireworks. It was probably a
Right.
little overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. It was super overwhelming. And that was also right when the Oklahoma City bombing had happened. I'm dating myself. I'm old. I'm in my 40s. That was the first Acquire the Fire I'd been to. And I remember when the bombing happened, I felt such a pull to help people. I really wanted to get involved and pray for people and ease their suffering. You know, Oklahoma City was only 8 hours away from my hometown. So I remember going forward at this Acquire the Fire, and Ron, and this is back when they were still in churches. This was before like the big stadium events. And I remember going forward and asking Ron to pray with me for the victims and their families of the Oklahoma City bombing. So there was already this connection between big life events and an emotional pull towards a relationship with God that I had never experienced before. And Teen Mania was more than ready to come in and say, yeah, you can do big things for God. You can do something really amazing as a teenager, even for this really awful, terrible thing that happened. You still matter. You can still make a difference. Your prayers matter, and we're going to pray with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt so powerful as a young person in that moment.
Yeah, of course. I think, especially as teenagers who are trying to figure out who they are and how they fit in the world and who they want to be, this really gives them a sense of purpose and identity. And even more so if they're already religious, it just builds on that and makes you feel extremely important, which I'm not against. I think that's great if that's what someone is being called to. I think where it gets a little tricky, though, is where they start militarizing, like you said in the beginning, they're militarizing these kids to battle the world and to create enemies of the world, enemies that may or may not even exist, and to make them feel like they're better than everyone and rise above, and you have to save people and have pity on those who are different than you. And that's where the perspective shift, I think, gets a little hard and tricky and not so great. And so I think those events specifically where you are breaking someone down to such an emotional state, and they're designed that way on purpose, just like any like self-help group that you would go to, right? It's big and loud and you're dancing and it's crazy, and then it gets really quiet, introspective and emotional, and that's where you cry, and that's when they
Exactly.
they ask you to be a warrior for God. And so of course you're like, this is the obvious answer. I mean, you can feel it in your bones. And how could you deny that emotional experience? But they're co opting it and saying, see, this is God telling you, rather than we're just having an emotional experience in group therapy.
Right.
So, what
Right.
was that like at the Acquire the Fire? Did you remember feeling that, well, shit, this is it? This is what I have to do?
Yeah, for sure. And I know that the docuseries goes through the recruitment process, right? But nobody can really understand what it's like to be in this kind of larger than life setting. And then they say, you can change the world, and here's how. You can go on a summer mission trip. You can take a gap year between high school and college and serve the Lord and find God's purpose for your life. It doesn't matter if you're 13 or 14. God can use you to go across the world and bring the message of his love and good news to people who really need to hear it. As a child who didn't feel important or seen or special, right? Or as a child who had a bit of a vulnerable background, hearing that there's a place to be not just fully accept it, but also affect a positive change. That's what most kids want to do. Like most kids want to be good kids. Most kids want to go out and do something really important and larger than life. And Teen Mania preyed on that. And so when you're at the Acquire the Fire and they say, come on out, and then they give you this big talk about summer missions and how fun it's going to be and how exciting it is, of course you're going to be like, well, I'm going. Like, hi, I'm going to go somewhere for a month or 2 months away from my family. And a lot of kids who went to these events were in very dysfunctional homes or were at risk. And so the idea of being able to leave and go somewhere for a month or two without parents was like, oh yeah, like sign me up twice, sign me up like for the rest of my life. It wasn't a hard
Yeah.
sell. And they knew that. They knew it wasn't a hard sell.
And these mission trips were a prerequisite to joining the Honor Academy, right?
Yep, that's right.
So I guess I'm still trying to put my finger on what they got out of this. So they're sending kids all over the world. And we've talked to a few people now who've been on the documentary. We talked to Phil, who had a horrible experience, almost died. I mean, that was a whole thing.
We were in the internship together.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I love when stories overlap.
Yep, same as Zachariah. So
Okay. Yeah. So we were talking to him about his experiences, but I'm trying to figure out because you really, for the most part, you're just going to other countries and putting on plays and saying, okay, we saved your soul because you saw us being mimes and pretending to do this little
right.
show, this drama. And then
that was like the sleeper line of the docuseries when Zachariah starts talking about the mimes. Like I fully lost it. I was like, you're a king. I love you so much.
wasn't it something like he goes, yeah, so if you didn't happen to catch the show with teenagers performing as mimes, I guess you're going to hell. Sorry, guys. Something like that. Is that the line you're
Sorry.
Sorry you missed
you have
out.
the privilege of seeing us as mimes.
Because the intent, at least as far as you were aware, was that if you didn't proselytize, if you didn't share the word of the Lord, then their blood is on your hands. So if they go to hell, it's your fault as a kid.
That's right. And
Yeah.
a child's brain is literal. There is no space for nuance. Nuance is something that happens with lived experience. When you're a child, you do not have those higher reasoning or higher cognition abilities simply because you haven't lived enough life to understand what it is that you can push back on or you can add nuance to or should add nuance to. I know a lot of Christians who still don't add any nuance to that. So yeah, it becomes very much if you fail at this, then people are dying and going to hell, and that's on you. It's a pretty heavy burden for a teenager.
Exactly. And going back to my original thought of what's the point of these mission trips, was it simply to funnel people into the Honor Academy? So you have Acquire the Fire that funnels people to do the mission trips, which funnel people to do the Honor Academy, which is a year long of you pay them to work for them situation.
Yeah, it was really about making money at the heart of it. I went to Russia in 1998 and I went for about 6 weeks. I went early to Texas for training to become a small group leader within our team. And for those 6 weeks, 1 week of which we were on campus, it was about $3,000, maybe more. So in 1998 money, that's a lot. Like that's a lot of that's a lot of money. And I was glad to pay it. And I raised money. I worked. I solicited funds from people in my church, family members to be able to go. And that's how most kids were able to go, right? I did car washes. I did everything I could to raise the money for it. But my dad broke down the costs before I went. He broke down the cost and he was like, even if I allow for all of these other like extenuating circumstances to happen, I can still only account for maximum of $1,800. So where's the rest of the money going?
Smart guy.
And I was like, well, I mean, they have to pay staff and because like I didn't realize that interns were literally running all of it at that point. I was like, they have to pay for staff, they have to pay for team leaders, they have to pay for other things. Like I'm sure it's justified. And what I know now is that summer missions was a major moneymaker. And making it a prerequisite for the Honor Academy for the internship program meant that they were already getting a major buy-in from you. They were already making a profit from you the whole month that you're on the mission field or 2 months that you're on the mission field. They're inundating you with come to the Honor Academy. You'd make such a great intern. Oh my goodness, it's the best year of your life. You have to do it. And of course, I was already in college at that point. I had just finished my freshman year. And I was like, I have a full scholarship. I'm not going to drop out of college and go to a stupid internship program. But lo and behold, I did.
Wow. So what made you change your mind then?
There were a couple of factors. I had a falling out with my parents over teen mania. My dad is very rigid. And so even though I was 19, I was old enough to make these decisions on my own. He didn't want me to go on the mission trip because it wasn't the right kind of Christianity. And I said, well, I delayed it for a year because you told me if I delayed it for a year, you'd give me your blessing. And so I delayed for a year. Like I held up my end of the bargain. Like this is this is yours.
Yeah.
And I'm doing something really good, Dad. Like I've wanted to go to Russia for years. And he was upset, very upset with that. And so while I was in Russia, they actually ended up moving out of state. And that was pretty intense for me. I got an email while I was gone telling me where my stuff was. It was with a friend at her house.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, here's money for like book money for when you get back. Good luck. We'll see you at Christmas. And I was just like, this is not what I signed up for. And they didn't want me to go to college. The fact that I was enrolled in college was a big deal. And I had had several scholarship opportunities in New York, in San Francisco, in Virginia. And I had to turn all of them down because my parents wouldn't support me going anywhere else for school. And so I stayed in West Texas. I stayed in Midland and went to the community college and studied journalism and was on track for another scholarship to Rice University. And they left and I was like, I don't know how to be an adult. I don't know how to live. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. So I dropped out. I dropped out the middle of my sophomore year of college and joined Teen Mania.
Okay, so many things. I'm just like trying to remember. So, first thing, was it the branch of Christianity that your dad didn't approve of that you were proselytizing, or was it because you were just not actually helping people and just doing mime skits?
No, I wish that was the reason. No, he was always opposed to anything that looked charismatic. So if people raised their hands while they were singing, or if they were okay with people speaking in tongues or laying hands on people to pray, he didn't believe that that was biblically sound. And at that point, I was just trying so hard just to have a relationship with God that I was like, but this is actually the only thing that has made sense to me. And why wouldn't you want me to go to Russia and share the gospel with people? That doesn't make sense to me. And it just came down to he didn't agree with their theology.
Got it. Okay, second question. Was it because of their theology and beliefs that they didn't believe in college?
Yes. They believed in college, just
But not for women.
Not for women. No.
Interesting. But you were clearly a great student because you got accepted in so many places.
I didn't think I was a great student. I was told that I wasn't a great student. My brothers are both very brilliant, like off the charts brilliant. And I'm smart, but I'm not off the charts brilliant in the ways that they are. And women in my family traditionally have not done well in college. Women in my family also traditionally have been told that they are not bright. So there's there's an erosion that happens in girls as they're growing up when they're told that you're not college material. You're like, oh, well, they would know. They went to college. They know what it takes. And so maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not college material.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, for sure. Missed opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. I think a good term, and I don't know if this is being used correctly because I just learned it, the learned helplessness
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
someone tells you over and over again that you can't do something, and so you just believe it and then act on those principles of thinking you can't do it, and so you do a poor job because of that.
Yep. Because that's the voice that you hear in your head. You don't look at what you're interested in. You don't look at what is resonating with you. I was a voracious reader. I would read a book a day if I could. I was so hungry to learn. And there was a time when I was in high school and I wrote an extra credit, like long form prose. And my teacher didn't believe that I wrote it. And I was at a private Christian school. And she didn't believe that I wrote it. And she goes, "Where did you plagiarize this from?" And I was like, huh? I was like, I watched a stupid Hallmark movie on TV last night and was inspired. And so I wrote it. And she was like, "But I've never seen anything like this from you." And I said, "Well, okay,
Okay.
but I still wrote it. Like, do you want me to go home and get like my rough drafts to bring to you so you can see it?" And she was like, "Well, you can plagiarize those. You can fake those." And of course, it was like a huge thing because she was accusing me of cheating.
Yeah.
And she called my parents, and my parents were like, "Did you do it?" And I was like, No, I wrote it. It's mine." And nobody believed me. And,
What?
and my brother, one of my brothers was home from college at the time, and he goes, "You have to admit, like, it is kind of hard to believe that you would write something like that." And I was just like,
Are you serious?
yeah. And so after that moment, I was just like, even if I am good at something, no one's going to believe that I'm capable of doing that.
Yikes.
And that was like a core crumbling for me. And even if I could do something really well, it didn't matter, right? Like nobody was going to believe me, much less believe in me.
Wow, what a moment for you. Because you
Pretty
were
messed
doing
up.
something truly exceptional and people are like,
Yeah.
nah.
Yeah.
I can't
Can't
even
be.
comprehend that.
Yeah. I mean, but that's also part of the culture. That's also part of this culture that I was raised in, where women are not capable of doing anything meaningful beyond having children and becoming wives. And you start with an eroded sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
You start with a perception that you are already less than. And I remember I was probably 16 or something, and I was like, man, it sucks to be a woman. Like, it is a punishment from God to be a woman. And I wish I was anything else except for a woman. And those were my teenage thoughts, right?
Yeah, that just shows the messaging and how heavy-handed it was for that to be, embedded in your brain. So the other thing I wanted to get to, I got to 1, 2, number 3, talk about feeling abandoned
Yeah.
and talk about feeling my parents' love is conditional. I did something that they disapproved of, and they literally picked up and left without me. I mean, what's going through your mind when you get that letter of your parents just left, figure it out?
Yeah. I was really angry. For me, I was a really good kid. I never drank. I never did drugs. I never had sex. Like, I was a really, really good youth group kid and tried my hardest. I was very earnest in my pursuit of God and morality. And that was the first time I remember thinking, like, I did everything you asked. I did every single thing you asked, and you still left anyway. And I was angry that I hadn't just defied them and gone to college where I wanted to go. I was angry that I had delayed my trip to Russia for a year. I was angry that no matter how much I tried, they were always going to be disappointed.
Is that why you think you doubled down and went into the internship? You're like, well, if they're not gonna approve of me anyway, I'm just gonna do this
Yeah,
and show them.
sure. I mean, I wasn't prepared to be on my own, right? I had been told my whole life that I wasn't capable of that.
Hmm.
And I felt very, very lost. And my grades tanked that semester. I didn't like the town. I never liked the town I was in. And I was ready to have a different experience. And there was nothing tying me there anymore.
Hmm. And with Teen Mania, it's basically all inclusive. You just show up, give them your money, and you have food and housing and friends and a purpose.
Exactly. And when I came back from Russia, of course, I had to tell my pastor and youth pastor and friend group who was still there, who hadn't gone off to college yet, um, what had happened. And I was met with a lot of compassion and also like a lot of shock and disbelief. Like, what? Like, yeah. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And as my grades started to tank and I slipped into a depression, I said, this is not sustainable for me. I think I am going to join the internship. And I did. Within 6 weeks, I applied and was accepted and was on my way.
And Teen Mania, the Honor Academy, is pretty pricey. So, how did you manage that without your parents' help?
I raised money. I was very fortunate to have a lot of people who believed in me and saw my earnestness. They understood what had happened, what had gone wrong with my parents. They were also the church that was pro Teen Mania that took me to acquire the fire. So people were happy to give me that money.
I think before we move on, though, was there anything that happened in Russia that you wanted to discuss?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. What happened in Russia?
My trip to Russia was really exceptional. I had had a burden for Russia since I was 9 years old. So for 10 years, I'd wanted to go to Russia. My mom was my Sunday school teacher. During that time, the Iron Curtain was just about to fall. She was telling us that Russia was a closed country. They wouldn't let Jesus in there. They wouldn't allow Bibles. They wouldn't allow people to have prayer meetings, which I know now is like propaganda, but whatever, it's fine. I said, but if nobody goes, does that mean they're going to go to hell? Like, if nobody tells them about Jesus, does that mean they're going to hell? And my mom said, yes. And I said, even though they have no way of knowing about Jesus, they're still going to go to hell. And my mom said, yes. And from that moment on, I really zeroed in on Russia. So even before Teen Mania, I was already feeling the burden to share the gospel with closed countries because I couldn't fathom how anyone could go to hell through no fault of their own, right? And in my childish brain, I didn't understand that any God that would send his children to eternal damnation and torture because they didn't know about him through no fault of their own was not a God that I would ever follow. That was like the antithesis of love. That's the antithesis of forgiveness, of grace. And instead, I just doubled down and was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to Russia. And went the first moment I had the opportunity. So I flew to Texas, or I drove to Texas, East Texas. So I lived in West Texas and I drove out to East Texas and attended missionary advisor training, which is training for small groups within these teams. And it was basically like a peer leader. We went to Russia. We stayed in St. Petersburg for the first part. On the flight over, there was a guy, his name is Dan O'Donnell, and he ended up becoming a very good friend of mine in the internship. But Dan was like the guy that could get away with anything. And he was on the ministry team. He did the skits. He was on stage. Everyone was like, Dan, you're so cute. And he had, big muscly calves and a broad chest and like blonde hair, blue eyes, big smile. And we became friends straight away during my trip. And we land in Russia. We've been traveling for about 36 hours at that point. He says, Carrie, come here. I was like, okay. And he goes, I need you to take this backpack. And this is what didn't make it into the docuseries. And I said, okay, what's in it? And he was like, this is the money for everyone for the whole month. And there were 80 people there, 80 people on the team or in the group. And I was like, okay. And I was like, how much is in it, Dan? And he goes, $80,000. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Okay. And he was like, here, give me your backpack. And he takes my backpack, puts it on. He puts this backpack on me, and it is heavy. Like I'm like being pulled backwards because of the
You're
weight
just
of
hauling wads of cash across the border?
thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, smuggling it through security at the St. Petersburg airport. And he puts it on my back and he's like, there you go. And I was like, what if they asked to search it? And he was like,
Uh-huh.
nobody is going to think anything of you. Nobody's going to think that you are up to no good. So don't worry about it. So I walk up to the counter and hand them my passport. And they're like, do you have anything to declare? And I was like, nope. And Dan is standing next to me. and they were like, okay, cool, there you go. And then they asked Dan, do you have anything to declare? And he goes, no. And they said, let me check your bag. And they did go through his bag, which was my
What?
stuff, right?
Which
Like,
looked suspicious because there's probably girly stuff in there.
I mean, who knows, right? And that was it.
I guess just why? Why do you have that much money? Why is it in wads of cat? Why do you need to take it to Russia?
In 1998, that was still, they were still coming out of communism, and the Western world was just starting to come in. So like they had their first McDonald's, they had their first Burger King, they had their first KFC that had just opened like a month or two before we got there. And they had no chicken, by the way.
What did
So
they have?
I
Kentucky
don't even
Fried
remember.
Chicken.
But we were like, we're at Kentucky Fried Chicken and there's no chicken. And they're like, yeah, don't know what to tell you. So it was still very rough there. It was still very rough. And you needed to have American cash in order to buy things, in order to trade, in order to exist. And that's how you change money. And I guess they didn't want to spend a lot of money with fees, but I was like, why wouldn't you just split it up between the project directors and the team leaders? Because then there would be 8 people, each carrying $10,000, which is not something that you have to declare.
Yeah.
Adult me was like that, but 19-year-old me was like, okay, I guess I'll do it.
They're just giving this money to the kids and hoping they don't get caught at customs. There are just so many
Yeah.
holes.
Yeah. Well, and I had a friend from youth group who went to China and they went to Hong Kong, and they gave her a skirt to put on and it had pockets for little New Testament Bibles. And they loaded that skirt up with New Testament Bibles and put like a broomstick skirt over it. So it was like flowy and you couldn't see it, and smuggled like 120 New Testaments across the border into China, like into a closed country. And she was 14. Teen Mania was so happy to put children in dangerous situations over and over and over again. And we thought we were doing it to serve the Lord. We thought we were breaking the rules for a good reason, not really understanding what we were saying yes to.
Yeah. That there were real consequences.
Yeah.
So other than that, Russia turned out to be everything you had hoped and dreamed and you saved a bunch of souls?
Sure. No,
Or so you
so
thought?
I don't know if you've ever seen any of these dramas. They are so hokey. I
Just
know
from what was
the
on the
docuseries.
documentary. Yeah.
Yeah, like they're painful. They're really they're low budget, and so we would take we would take these a sound box, and then we'd like get our clothes on, our uniforms on, our costumes on, and then we would find public places to perform these dramas in. And St. Petersburg is like the mecca of um, art and culture for Russia. And really, like it's such a beautiful city. Like teen mania aside, St. Petersburg is just stunning. And that's where like, the Russian ballet is. And then we're like out doing like our little we're playing swords. We're playing like, oh, Jesus is gonna get crucified. Like this is so great. And we have a sound box that's saying everything in Russian. So like we don't even have to say anything. With this horrible music, and then people gather around and they watch, and most of them are laughing. I get it. Like it was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. And then we would try to pray for them, and some of them would be like, these Americans in weird costumes want to pray for us? Sure. Okay. And then they'd let us like pray for them, and then we were like, commit, commit, commit. Like sign the I gave my heart to Jesus card. And that was what we were going for. Meanwhile, as we're doing this drama one day, it's across from Nevsky Prospect, which is like that's where people take Russian Orthodox people take their pilgrimage to from all over Russia. They come to Nevsky Prospect. And there was a big to do across the street. And we were asking our translators, like, what's happening? And they're like, Boris Yeltsin is there, and he's laying the Romanov family remains to rest. And we are literally across the street doing our stupid drama as this like historic event is happening. And I was like, can we like pause and like go watch? Because that's history happening across the street from us. And they're like, no, we gotta keep going.
Yeah. A little tone deaf.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. Yep.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you went to Russia, you get home, parents are gone, and you're like, well, okay, Honor Academy it is. So let's talk about your experience there. What were some of the hardest parts, pros, cons, all the things?
Yeah, I showed up and they immediately put you into like a mini boot camp. And you wake up in the morning, they do physical assessments to see what you're capable of. Can you run a mile? Can you do 10 push-ups? Can you do 100 sit-ups? Can you like all of these metrics, right? And then you go get ready for the day. And then for an entire week, you sit in this auditorium and they just test you to see what your aptitude is. So those who scored high on like the office aptitudes, like I could type, I forget, like 80 words a minute or something at the time. They'd be like, oh, you scored really high for executive positions. So those people are going to be segregated over here. And these people didn't do very well. So we're going to put them over here. And then they gave us a bunch of personality tests and made job assignments based on those tests. So we were being tested and lectured all day, waking up every morning, doing hard physical workouts, and then orientation at night. Lots of family meetings, meeting our core mates, like the people that we lived with, bonding with them. And that was like the first week. And then the next week we had our ministry placements. And I was placed as an administrative assistant to the director of Honor Academy recruiting.
How was that?
the worst experience of my professional life. Truly.
Why?
So this is when I really started to question my decision to go. My boss was extremely demanding, and she would stalk me all hours of the day. If I got up from my desk to go make copies, she would pop up and be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Making copies." And would find something to confront me on every single day. She had a long list of things for me to do daily, and I wasn't allowed to leave until I finished the list. And something that was not talked about a lot um, were the work hours. Teen Mania said that people were only supposed to work 30 hours a week. I didn't work less than 60 hours a week for the first 8 months I was there. And I often worked on weekends as well. And knowing that I couldn't leave until my list was done and knowing that it was too much to do. So I was really wearing thin emotionally at that point. I was being confronted to the point of tears daily. She would stalk me. One time our copier was broken in the Honor Academy department. So I went upstairs to Global Expeditions, the missions department, to use their copier. I was talking to a friend while I was standing there waiting for the copies to be done. And she comes into the room, and there are about 10 or 12 people in the room. And she says, "Carrie, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making copies." And she was like, "Why are you up here? We have a copier." And just like starts going off on me in front of this entire room. And she had gone off on me before many times, but it was usually in front of other administrative assistants or people in the department. And another staff member was walking by, and she was the director of women, and she heard my boss just tearing into me, and she said, "Hey, outside right now." Pulled her outside into the hallway and just was like, "You can't ever talk to anyone that way. I don't ever want to hear you talking to anyone that way, but especially not somebody that works for you, who's doing the job that you have tasked her with. And you owe her an apology right now." And she walked off. She didn't apologize. And the director of women followed up with me later, and she was like, "I'm so sorry. How are you doing with that?" And I was like, "She's still that person." And it was a nightmare. There was no pleasing her. Yeah, like she eventually moved upstairs to be Ron's executive administrator, and which was like the highest staff level position you could achieve without being like the director of the Honor Academy, without being Dave, essentially. And she said, "Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Absolutely not. Goodbye." Like I I wasn't up for more verbal abuse, and that's what it turned into. It turned into psychological abuse. I had walking pneumonia after I'd been there for a month or two, and I called into work, and she said, "No, you still need to come to work." And I said, "I have a fever of 104." And she said, "Take some Advil and come in." And I was like, "I can't get out of my bed. Like it's hard for me just to call you, like get out of bed long enough to walk out to the hallway to call you." She said, "No, you need to come in. And if you don't come in, you better go to the doctor and get a doctor's note." And so I did. And I ended up spending I didn't have health insurance. So I ended up spending about $250 to go to the doctor. Had to find someone to drive me. He was very concerned. I wasn't the first person from Teen Mania that he had seen. And he was like, "You need to be out of work for at least a week. You are very ill." And I said, "My boss isn't going to let me." And he goes, "Give me her name and I'll call her." And I was so terrified that he would actually call her, because I knew that she would turn that back on me, that I would be punished for that. There would be retribution if he called. I said, "No, it's cool. I'm good." And he goes, "I mean it. You need to be in bed for like a week." And wrote me a prescription for a Z-Pack and went and filled it, got back to the dorm, and she called me within minutes of me arriving back at the dorm and said, "Where have you been?" I said, "I went to the doctor's." And she said, "What did he say?" And I said, "I have a note, and he told me that I need to be in bed for the next week." And she said, "Absolutely not. Did he give you, did he write you a prescription for an antibiotic?" And I said, "Yes, he did." And she said, "Did you fill it?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Have you taken it yet?" And I said, "Yes. I took my first dose on the way home from the pharmacy." And she said, "Okay, well, you'll be fine in 24 hours, and I expect you back tomorrow." And I did. Like, I was sick as a dog. I took a nap under my desk that day when she was in a meeting the next day, and just kept working. And we were expected to. We were expected to continue to push and push and push, um, to the point of our own health deteriorating.
Yeah, that's
So, yeah,
awful.
I was pretty glad to be rid of her, honestly.
And not to
Um,
mention, this isn't a regular job. You're not getting paid to do this. You're paying to be there.
that's right. Um, so that was my next kind of like, who would force this, right? Like, who would force a sick person to work? But then I was also being told that I needed to beat my body, right? Like, that my flesh was weak. And so I needed to get my flesh in line. And there were so many messages coming like that, where we were taught to disconnect from our physical experiences. We were taught to disconnect from our own mental cognitions, right? From our own feelings, our own instincts. We were dying to ourselves, and this was part of the death.
So they're teaching you to dissociate.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So, what are some of the other, if you can remember, spiritual things that they would say to you or religious backed things that they would say to get you to ignore all of your red flags in all of the ways, physically, mentally, emotionally?
Yeah. So one of their tenets, we signed a vow saying that we would never speak ill of teen mania. I think Phil
Whoops.
spoke about this. Yeah. Brilliant.
Well,
What's a vow? Not to break. Um, no, I think that they used programming like that a lot. They told us, like, during that first week, during Gauntlet Week, they told us not to share everything that was happening with our families or with our friends back home, because they, quote, wouldn't understand.
no, they wouldn't understand.
No, they wouldn't, because
They
it was
wouldn't.
psychotic. Like, it was
Yeah.
like, I'm a mom now, and the thought of sending, my son is 12, and the thought of sending my own kid to something like this just makes me ill. And to think that there were adults telling us, like, trying to manage the flow of information in, like, we weren't allowed to watch TV. We weren't really allowed to watch many movies. We weren't allowed to listen to music, which means we weren't really listening to the radio. That kind of information, like, shunting, right, in both directions. So we're not getting a lot of information coming in. We're very limited on the information going out. It created this world where Dave and Ron and other staff members were like the final authority. It helped us not question what we were doing. It made it easier to just kind of fall in line. And what's interesting is I look back at pictures of myself during that time, and I've seen videos of other people during that time, and they're trying to be like the shiny, happy people. Like, yeah, like, yay, Jesus, yes, Honor Academy. And they look dead inside. I look dead inside. I look at pictures of myself and at my own eyes, and I'm like, where did she go? Like, she was bright. She was sparkly. She wanted to do something big, and she was crushed. And you can see, I mean, I can see, I don't know if anyone else could see, but like, I could see in my face just how small I was becoming. And that was the whole point.
Yeah.
It's easier to control people when you tell them to die to themselves.
Yeah. And you teach people how to be very good at masking, because that's all you're doing is creating a facade. And you don't want to portray the wrong facade, or else people will think you're not worthy or spiritual enough or doing it right. And so you just get really good at laying it on thick, thicker and thicker and
Yep.
thicker and thicker. And then when you leave, you're like, I feel so exposed, because all of a sudden that facade is gone and you're trying to figure out who you want to present, who you want to be, who you are.
Yeah. And then you just want to go back.
Yeah.
Then you just want to go back
Easier
because you
to
feel too
pretend.
exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I graduated from my internship year, and they asked me to stay. They offered to pay for me to stay, to cover my tuition for a second year. And I said, absolutely no way. No way. Because at that point I was convinced that I was in a cult.
Wow, you
And
knew.
yeah.
Wait, we got to dig into that. Does it have to do with ESOAL? Because I do want to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah. I think before we talk about ESOL, it's really important to talk about Columbine.
Okay, let's do it.
So on our way to day one, we heard about Columbine, and we were on this bus that they called it the Franken bus because it kept breaking down, and it was built of all these random bus parts that didn't belong together. And so a trip that should have taken us 2 days ended up taking us 5 days. And we were supposed to be there early to set up, and we got there days late. And we arrive, there's like a flurry of activity. Everyone's talking about Columbine. We are like listening to the radio the whole way up, trying to understand what's going on. We walk into day one, and Ron Luce just loses his mind.
And this is just for context for people who haven't seen the documentary. This is day one is this huge event, right? That you're putting on.
Yep. 90,000 kids and youth leaders from all
Wow,
over
that's
the United
enormous.
States.
90,000?
Yes, it was the first of its kind. It was the first of its kind at the time. And so Columbine is unfolding as we're traveling up. We have members, really important members of the ministry team and the support crew on our bus. And Ron is a maniac on stage, trying to get sound checks done and everything else. And is the night before the event begins. And he starts yelling at us for being late, just going off. And he's on a microphone on stage in a stadium that holds 90,000 people, and he's having a temper tantrum because we were late because the bus that we were on kept breaking down.
Yeah.
Like, and that gives you like an insight to what it was like to work with him behind the scenes. He was a tyrant. He was an infant. Like, he threw so many fits. And then we're told that like things were going to have like a somewhat different approach to day one. Things are changing very quickly. We are all exhausted and go to our host college where we had bunk beds and fall asleep for 4 hours before we get back up and head back to the Silver Dome. And immediately they briefed us, and they're like, the show's changing. And Rachel Scott was on was one of the victims of Columbine, and she was signed up to go on a mission trip with Teen Mania. And they made a huge pivot, and Ron immediately started using Rachel as a ploy to sign more kids up for mission trips. And it became who will go in her place. And we were almost done with the Acquire the Fire season at that time. But after that, after Columbine, after day one, all of these like militaristic themes, which were kind of in the background, suddenly became very pronounced. They came to the foreground, and it changed the culture of Teen Mania. It changed the culture of the Honor Academy. Everything became more extreme after that. And so they decided to stop doing the crosswalk, and they replaced this crosswalk activity, which was insane anyway. They replaced this activity with ESOAL. And ESOAL stands for Emotionally Stretching Opportunity of a Lifetime. And it was developed to be like war games, essentially. They pitched it as like G.I. Jane style training, which was like a really big movie back then. And we watched it leading up to ESOAL, so we would know what to expect. And they said, it's so intense, Dave. Dave said, it's so intense. It is so emotionally stretching that we are making this optional. And immediately I was like, I'm opting out. Like, I'm done. Like, I don't need any more verbal abuse. I don't need any more trauma. I am exhausted. I don't need to push myself. I don't need to beat my body. I don't need to do anything else. I'm just trying
Consider
to,
me stretched.
yes, like I'm good. I'm really good. And I was berated for that by staff, by fellow interns. I was confronted about it. I was confronted to the point of being bullied. Even for weeks after, people remembered that I didn't do it. And every time I'd have to give my justification. I've been through enough. I don't need to do it. I know that if I come up against government overseas, that I'll be fine. Like, I'll either die or I won't. Like, but this game in the woods isn't going to teach me anything.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who, it was Dan O'Donnell, same friend from Russia. And he was on staff at that point. And he had been part of making the ESOL course. And he was so broken by it. And he took me, and this was like breaking the rules. Like, number one, he was a staff member. I was an undergrad intern. We shouldn't be alone in the woods together at night after curfew. And I was also just so done. I was like, I don't care. Like, what are you going to do to me? It is what it is. And he was like, I just need to share this with someone. And I know that you're not doing it, so I'm not ruining anything for you. But like, I need to share it with someone. And he took me on a 4-wheeler around the course. And I was very late at night. And he wept. He was so broken by it. And he was like, Carrie, I think that this is a mistake. I think this is a mistake. And I tried to tell them, I tried to tell Dave, I tried to tell Ron that this was a mistake. And they said, it's too late. We're going forward with it. And he was really tormented by that. And he's like, so what do I do? And I was like, dude, I don't know. What do you do? Right. And he went ahead and he facilitated that first ESOL. And afterwards, he was broken for the rest of his time there. And he had night terrors. He was trying to advocate for the interns, and leadership wasn't listening to him. And he ended up leaving his staff position that December, and passed away in a car accident 3 or 4 months later. And
man.
he never got an opportunity to talk about that. He never got an opportunity to set that piece straight. And the other part of that is the leadership knew that it was a mistake then. Somebody who helped design and develop the course said, this is a mistake, and they still went through with it anyway. And Dan had a military background. He had gone through high-level military special ops training. So this was coming from a place of knowledge for him. And they said, no, too late. We're gonna keep going. And man, it was so harmful. It was such a harmful weekend. And a friend of mine was placed in a coffin, like a wooden coffin. They nailed it shut and they buried her in the coffin. And of course, they didn't leave her in there for very long. Like, as if like 2 seconds in a coffin, much less being buried alive in the coffin, isn't going to traumatize you for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was this callousness on Dave and Ron's end, but especially Dave's. There was a coldness. And a man who talked about integrity and honor and living with excellence and living this disciplined life, right? It was all trauma bonding with him. And even now, there's a part of me that's like, oh no, what if Dave sees this and he's upset with me? Oh well, right? But there's still that
Yeah.
there's still that 19-year-old inside of me that's like, you might see this and it might not be okay. And that's the
Yeah.
old echoes of the trauma bond, with the abuser and the victim.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar or who haven't seen the documentary, do you remember any of the other things that they were putting people through that weekend?
Um, they dug a trench, filled it up with water, and you had to walk through it. They made you do exercises, to the point of throwing up. And if you stopped exercising, if you stopped before for any reason, they would make you roll down a hill, and people would throw up from exhaustion and motion sickness on the way down the hill. And then other kids would just have to roll down that same hill in other people's vomit. They fed them cat food. They slept in temporary shelters called Quonset domes, which is where we housed missionaries that came for the summer. And the mattresses were infested with chiggers. And they gave them, they're like, okay, it's time for bed. And they turn out the lights. And 30 seconds later, they turn on like heavy metal, very loud music, blasting it in people's faces, yelling at them, uh, putting on like they put on a strobe light, so it was impossible to sleep. Like these are actual acts of torture. And the defense was, well, you could ring out at any time. You could ring the bell and ring out any time, except that you were mocked for that. You were belittled for that. You were verbally abused for that. And even for the people who did ring out, they carried a tremendous sense of shame afterwards. So, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of verbal assault. It was sleep deprivation. It was pushing your body well past its limits. It was spiritual abuse as well, because you would be reciting scriptures and you had to memorize these scriptures in advance. You'd be reciting these scriptures while being yelled at, right? And they would degrade you. They'd tell you that you have to, like, they would target young men who were known to struggle with their sexuality, and I say struggle in quotation marks, and they would really zero in on them and make them say, I'm not a man. They would shout it in their face, say, I'm not a man. And these young men would be crying and weeping and saying, I'm not a man. Like,
Oh,
I I think the docuseries actually let Dave and Ron off really light. But especially Dave. Dave was a monster, and nobody could stand in his way. Nobody could stop him. He was determined to do this to children. And there were underage kids there. There was a kid there my year who was 15. My best friend did the internship when she was 16. There were so many kids who were underage, and they were allowed to go through these horrific things. And it wasn't just ESOAL, it was the World Awareness Retreat. It was like fashioned after the end times, and they would be kidnapped. They would kidnap people, right? And throw them in these shower stalls, these outdoor shower stalls, and set the water on to drip, 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 drip on them all night long, outside, exposed. Their hands and feet are zip tied too tight. They would sit them in a chair and then knock them out of the chair. And Ron's defense is that it was all a game, except your nervous system doesn't know that it's a game. Your nervous
mm-mm.
system doesn't understand the fight or flight as a game. It is very real, and especially so far removed from society. It was very real, and we were very genuinely preparing ourselves to die. And that was the heart behind ESOL. That was the heart behind the Unreached People Group Retreat. That was the heart behind Crosswalk and the World Awareness Retreat, and even the long fasting retreats, which were 5 to 7 days. It was meant to prepare us to die.
It's insane. As you were talking, just the big letters popping up in my head. Why? 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 All of this, it just is so out there and so unnecessary and so traumatizing and so abusive. And these are kids and they're paying to be there and their parents don't know what's going on and you're completely isolated, but everyone's going through it. And so you don't want to be the one who's stuck out of the crowd. You don't want to be the one who's socially isolated because you're having a hard time. So you put on a face, you mask, you keep going. And all of that for what? I think one part, well, most of the documentary, they zoomed in on you talking about how you never expected to live a long life. You expected to die a martyr. And you just mentioned that that's basically the point of it, is they are preparing you and your brain emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually to die for this cause because you are being persecuted. So how did that affect you internally, that mindset, that constant drilling?
I think so many of us went into the internship with a pretty broken sense of self. And I did, of course, which we talked about. But their goal was to completely remove it. Their goal was to either get you to stay longer or to get you to pay them forever, right? And if you're thinking and you're feeling and you're experiencing something that is not sanctioned by them, it's going to be really hard to hold that line. It's going to be really hard to make that break. And their goal was to keep you in the line. Their goal was to keep you subjected even after you left, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, that even though you leave the cult, even though you leave the physical place, you don't leave that mentality behind. You take that mentality with you into the next phase of your life. And when I left Teen Mania, I finished my year and I got on a plane and I was really, really sick and went back to live with my parents. It was such a struggle just to get out of bed. And they were like, "Who are you?" Right? And I was like, "I don't really know." I don't really know. I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of movie. I was afraid of boys. I was afraid of television. I was afraid of social situations and interactions. And I was very fortunate that I had a group of friends pretty quickly as soon as I left, like a new group of friends who were in like a similar life place. And every time I could make connection with Teen Mania people, I did. And that was the case for years afterwards. Anytime there was an Acquire the Fire, anytime there was an alumni event, I was going to see my people. And anytime there was a plea for money, I was pulling out my wallet, even though I was a broke college student, right? And when I was 26, I became the chief operating officer for an international medical mission organization. And this is what I had planned to do at Teen Mania. And I made a 5-year plan. And I went well beyond my 5-year plan and achieved my 10-year plan and my 15-year plan in 6 years. And I remember writing to Dave Hawes saying, "Hey, look, I did it." And I was 26. I said, "Hey, look, I did it. I am the head of this organization. We bring medical care to people in war-torn parts of Guatemala, up in the highlands. We're starting this fund to send Indigenous doctors through medical school. And we recruited an American doctor in the meantime, to go live down there full time, and like recruiting these teams to come down and breathing new life into this organization." And the thing that I thought it would take me until I was in my mid 30s to do, I'm doing in my mid 20s. And like, look, I did it. And like, it makes me sick to like think about it now, but I was so eager for his approval and his recognition. Like, yes, you did the thing that you said you were going to do. You did the thing to make the difference in the world. And he wrote back, "Great job." And that was it. And I was like, oh God. Okay. Wow. Okay.
But that just proves, hold on, that just proves everything though, right? Because as you're talking, I'm like, yes, this is what I mean. This is what you need to be doing. This is where you got to send the kids to make an actual difference, to help people, and not just put on mime skits, but to really, truly help people without the expectation of, well, we'll give you food if you sign our card about giving your life to Jesus. Just actually helping people in the world. And it just proves that that was never the intention of the organization of Team Mania, because if it were, he would have said, wow, that's amazing. Any tips you can give us on how we can improve our missionary programs, or how is it going for you, or I don't know,
Great partner.
anything more than
Yeah,
just thumbs up.
literally. It was literally great job, Dave. And that was like, it was kind of like an existential moment for me. I was like, okay, so now I've achieved everything that I thought it would take me 10 more years to do. What now? And I thought I would get kudos, and I got like a pat on the head, essentially. What now? And as I embarked on this new career, I started asking myself, how good is the good that I think that I'm doing? And that was the beginning of unraveling my faith. That was the beginning of unraveling just how deeply the cult still had a hold on me, even though I was aware that it was a cult, right? Like the awareness that it's a cult doesn't change, like it didn't change that I was still part of it because they were still my people, right?
Yeah.
And you stay for the people. If cults were like, we're evil, we're bad, they would never be cults to begin with. Cults are full of wonderful people. Cults
Mhm.
are full of earnest, hardworking, really, really smart human beings who find themselves in a position to be exploited. And that was my moment. That was my moment of I did all these things and it still doesn't matter. Like I've been doing the
Yeah.
right thing my whole life, right? And this was like from childhood on. I've been doing everything right for my whole life. And now what? And that question, how good is the good that I think that I'm doing? Who's telling me that I'm doing a good job? Is it the people that I'm helping, or is it the people who are doing the helping? And that became my litmus test. How well do the people we're serving think that we're doing
Yeah.
versus the people who we're working with? And as it turns out, we weren't actually doing a whole lot. Like
Wait, really?
we were doing a
It
good job.
sounded so
Yeah,
great.
we were doing a good job. No, we were doing a good job. But when you add in the element of faith, where you make something contingent
Oh,
upon,
so it was still contingent.
sure, um, like they didn't have to be saved to get life-saving surgeries. They didn't have to confess that they were, Christians. But we also made it very clear, like, this is Jesus. Jesus is doing this. We aren't doing this. Jesus is doing this. And then here's the church that we're partnering with, right? And then that church is not doing really great. Or like we're bringing this team in and we have a strict no drinking policy for cultural reasons. And also doctors are on call the whole time they're with us, right? And if they're drinking alcohol and they're on call, then they're not going to be able to do their jobs if something goes wrong in the middle of the night with one of their surgical patients. And like, you know, if you're out in this community that thinks that alcohol is to blame for every terrible thing that happens and they see their doctor drinking alcohol, like what are we saying to them, right? And so it just became like a very complex, like, how good is the good? The medical stuff is good. But then we would leave, right? Like these teams, they would leave and they would go home and there would be no follow-up, maybe until the next year. And we had a doctor on site, but she could only do so much. If we're seeing hundreds of people, we're performing dozens and dozens and dozens of surgeries every year. How many people could she reasonably follow up with and keep on track with medications that sometimes were prescribed,
Mhm.
like American medications that were sometimes prescribed, but not always accessible. So anyway, it was just like taking a deeper look at how do we make it more sustainable and who's telling us that we're doing a good job. Like we're here to serve people. We're here to serve the people that we set out to love and to care for. And if they don't think we're doing a good job, then something's really broken.
Yeah. And that sent you on a road to deconstructing your entire faith?
Yeah.
So where did that leave you?
I mean, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't necessarily, I'm agnostic, I guess, atheist agnostic. And I still have my own spiritual practice, but it doesn't revolve around Jesus or God or convincing anyone of anything. It is really just a deeper reflection for myself. And how do I get to be the person that I really want to be? How do I become a person that's full of kindness and grace? How do I use my boldness and my voice to help people heal? And I don't mean on a big scale, right? My life is not big scale. Like how do I use that to become a better mom, a better partner, a better friend?
Mhm.
And that's the stuff that really matters. That's where faith, I think, really comes into play, is like faith in yourself. Like you can do the things that you want to do, right? And there are costs to doing the things that you want to do. There are character lessons that will cost you, but
Yeah.
artificially producing those costs for artificial lessons is a very different and dangerous track.
Yep. I agree. And it's so powerful to be the quote missionary just by living an example and showing people that you can be a kind, loving, amazing, compassionate person without a secret agenda. You just are. And there's no reason for you to be this way. There's no reward in heaven you're trying to reach, and there's no hell that you're trying to avoid. You're just being a good person. And I think that speaks volumes too, especially with your background and where you came from and your goal of being that missionary. And now you can just take that energy of outward projection and reflect. And how can that make you a better person? And I think that's great.
Yeah. And then I get to show up for, I mean, I have like a regular job and, like my life is very uneventful, unremarkable, but the people that I have in my life are remarkable. And I value the community that I've built. And I value moments like this where I'm able to reach more people and offer them hope and hopefully some healing on the other side of reawakening some of the trauma or some of that pain, right?
Yeah. And now you're standing up, being a voice. I love it. So,
Yeah.
what brings you happiness and peace and all the things today?
Any day I get to wake up and say hello to the world is a great day. And today is no different. Today I got to wake up and next to a wonderful partner who is loving and kind and emotionally available, strong, and on the same speed, right? I got to wake up next to him this morning, got to give my dog a hug. I got to chat with my kids. I got to go to a job that I don't even have to leave my house for and interact with coworkers who are like, I have the best professional team ever. They're so wonderful and so funny. And then I have an opportunity to come talk to you. Like this is the life. This is the joy. This is the reason for getting up every day.
Oh, I love that. That's so awesome. Yeah, I was so happy to hear that you were already familiar with the show and I reached out. I was like,
Yeah.
ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think what you're doing is really important work. And it's hard to deconstruct from these harmful systems because they become part of our background. And for most of us, the reason why we join cults is because there's already a break in our framing to begin with. It's not because we're stupid. It's not because we were too vulnerable. It's because our pain, our vulnerability was exploited.
Yeah,
So
that's
shoring
usually
that
the
up can be
case.
a hard, long process.
Yeah, for sure. So, with that in mind, what's your Linda listen?
Listen to your gut. Linda,
Yeah,
Linda, listen to your gut.
I love it. And I feel like you should bring around that other quote that really stood out to me. Is the good that you're doing as good as you think it is? Or
Oh,
you said it
yeah.
differently, but that really stood out. How did you say it exactly? Is the good as I think it is?
How good is the good that you think you're doing? And who's telling you that it's good?
So awesome. Thanks for coming on, Carrie. It's been great talking
Thank
to you.
you. You're lovely. I so appreciate you and the time you took today. It's a long, long trek for you. So thank you.
Well,
Thank
thank
you for having
you.
me.
Yeah,
Really
how can people find and support you on the socials?
Sure. I mean, I would love to monetize TikTok, just I'm a single mom. So I have a wonderful partner, don't get me wrong, but our lives are still very separate. And I would love to monetize TikTok. So if anybody wants to find me there, it's my name, Carrie Saum, Saum, and give me a follow so I can make a little bit of money off of the content that I sporadically produce.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook
Oh,
and all of that too.
Instagram. What's your hat? Your hat? What's your at on Instagram?
Carrie Saum.
Okay.
And it's the same on all the platforms. On Facebook, if you try to friend me, I won't say yes, but you can follow my professional page.
That's funny. I like the honesty. Well, any other final thoughts before we go?
No, thank you so much. This is such an honor to be a guest on your show.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you being here. So if you are watching, thank you so much for being here. Leave those words of encouragement for Carrie. It means so much to us, to our guests, and it boosts the algorithm, even if it's an emoji, like, share, all the things, YouTube things, subscribe. And if you want to support further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. And we have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. And if you like this video, definitely check out all of our videos on the Shiny Happy People too. We have so many incredible guests, so we'll probably put them in a little playlist for you guys to check out. We'll definitely link 2 more of them down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.